everyone, welcome to another episode of Mind Over Matter. I'm your host Sana, and today we have an extraordinary guest, Randy-Lee Bowslaugh. So, Randy is a mental health advocate, author, and YouTuber who has bravely shared her journey through depression, PTSD, autism, and the loss of two siblings to drug addiction. Her story is one of resilience, hope, and transformation. So, let's quickly dive into this heartfelt conversation about overcoming life's toughest challenges and finding strength in vulnerability. So, Randy, welcome to the show, and it's an absolute pleasure having you with us.
Thanks. It's a pleasure being here.
So, Randy, can you share with us your journey with depression and how it has shaped your life navigation work?
Yeah. So I always like to say that I probably first experienced depression as a teenager. I would say around the age of 14, but I didn't know what it was at the time. I just thought everybody had those thoughts about hurting themselves and how they were awful people. It wasn't until much later when I was in college taking psychology classes that I learned there is a term for it, and it's actually not a normal thing. It's your brain playing tricks on you. So that was my first real um like light bulb moment of going, oh wow, so maybe there's something I can do about this. Because up until that point I had lots of ups and downs with it. I had at one point actually written goodbye letters to people, and actually planned on how I would end it all. So finally having a term to use to it, it didn't immediately make me take action, but it was the start of taking action. It wasn't until a few years later I had a complete breakdown at work, and I went, "No, I'm not okay." And then I actually went and talked to the doctor and got on antidepressants and started going to therapy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Randy. So, um, what coping strategies have you found most effective over the years?
Um, Exercise, writing about it. Writing about it was my very first coping skill that I didn't even realize I was using. I was just writing as a teenager, writing out poetry. That became my first book, and I didn't realize that it was considered a coping strategy. Uh, and then later, exercise, having animals, going for walks, nature. Most recently, actually, I just on this past weekend, I went to a deprivation tank where you just float. It was the coolest thing ever. I am definitely going back, and I highly recommend those with depression try it. It was fantastic. And then I would say one of the biggest skills that I learned in therapy is to question why. So a lot of times when I would be spiraling with my depressive thoughts and about how I can do no good and this person's going to be mad at me if I say something, my therapist goes, "Okay, why do you think that?" I said, "I don't know, because they just will be." And she goes, "But why? Is there proof? Is there evidence? Has that ever happened before?" Well, no. So that really has stuck with me. That was one of the very first skills that she taught me, uh, probably 10 years ago now, and it's one that I use a lot. Where is the evidence for these thoughts in my brain?
Hmm, that's incredible, incredible, Randy. And really, I mean, it's incredible to see how you have turned your struggles into a source of strength. Um, so can you also talk about, mention about the challenges and rewards of parenting a child with autism while also being on the spectrum yourself?
Yeah, that is a lot of fun. So my daughter was diagnosed. She's 18 now. She was diagnosed at the age of 8. Females are often diagnosed later because they present differently than males. So a lot of times, boys will have the hand flapping or the spinning in circles, the more obvious signs, whereas females, you tend to have to watch more of those subtle nuances. So it took a very long time for her to get the diagnosis at the age of 8. It was such a struggle before that because my husband and I kept saying, "No, there's something different. There's something there's something wrong." And I hate saying that now because now I know what the what it is, but at the time, we didn't know what it was. We said, "Something is wrong. Something is happening. Like, we don't know what it is. We need help." And the school at the time could go, "Nope, it's just behavior. It's just behavior." And I had a very old school doctor who didn't really know much about autism, so we ended up having to actually switch doctors, and they had a child psychiatrist in their office that finally helped us get the diagnosis, and then from there, I was researching like crazy, but to find out how to best support her, and it was such a difficult time trying to navigate the school system when they really didn't have supports for her. They kept just pushing her to a different class and a different class. And also trying to figure out how to deal with the meltdowns. They were completely, for lack of a better term, completely insane. These meltdowns that she would have, they would become very violent. She had tried to run out into the road before. She had thrown glass at like glass cups and stuff. So there was a lot to navigate to try and figure out because it wasn't a behavioral issue. It was an overstimulation issue, but we didn't know where the overstimulation was coming from. So it was very difficult for a very long time. And one day, so she was diagnosed before I know I had autism. And then one day she was probably about 10 maybe. And she goes, "Mom, I have autism, so do you." And I went, "Huh, you might be right." So I went and I talked to an adult specialist, and throughout the big long assessment, she goes, "Yep, you have moderate autism." And so I was like, wow, okay, a lot of my life now makes sense. And by learning that it made sense for me, I kind of took a step back and went, okay, if these things that I did were outside of the norm, now I kind of understand where my kid is coming from being kind of outside of the norm. And it made it a little bit easier to bridge that gap and to help her. Um, there's still a lot of ups and downs, but I think by having a better understanding has made the biggest difference of how to support her and find those common grounds.
Wow. Wow. I think parenting is challenging enough, and I think Randy, your experience adds another layer of complexity. I feel that your perspective is incredibly enlightening. Um, Now also, losing two siblings to drug addiction, it must have been incredibly difficult. So how did you cope with such profound loss? And what message do you have for others going through similar experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out the best way to cope with that. But my older brother, he died 3 years ago now. Yeah, it'll be 3 years in May, and it was very shocking at the time. So I got the phone call before my mom. I was actually the one that had to tell my mom that it had happened. That was very I could barely get the words out, before I started crying, and after his death, I had to help her plan the funeral, the viewing, everything. COVID restrictions were still around here, so it was very tricky to coordinate things. They would only let us have 10 people in the room at a time. You couldn't hug anybody at the funeral. We're like, "Pff, yeah, okay." Um, because when you were experiencing such a significant loss, you need that comfort. So it was really tricky to balance the rules at the time with what you needed. Um, I would say I dealt with his death by writing a book. So I wrote a book about his death. It's called Goodbye Too Soon. And that was probably the biggest coping skill that I used to deal with it because at the time it was what could I have done to prevent it? Could I have said something differently? Because I had just spoken with him a week prior and it was could I have done something, said something, whatever, what could I have done differently? But ultimately I couldn't. It was his choices in his life that he needed to take control of. So it was a bit of a long road. I talked to my therapist about it. That's a big one. And realizing that holding on to guilt over something that couldn't be changed wasn't helping anyone. So that was how I really handled Brandon's death. And then my little sister was last summer. And I'm still figuring that one out. That one's trickier, uh, because instead of being the younger sister where I was looking up to my brother and going, "I don't know anything, I'm learning from you," kind of thing growing up. This was me being 10 years older than my little sister going, "Oh my gosh, I wasn't there for you," because, we're such a far removed in our lives where what situations we're in. I was dealing with all of the all of the things dealing with raising my kid with autism that I talked about, while my sister was a teenager and getting into some bad stuff. So there was, again, a lot of this, I wish I could have been there more for her, but when I sit down and I stop and I really process it, I couldn't, because I wasn't in the place in my life to have been there for her. My house was also chaos. So it was just, there is so many emotions that go into dealing with such a loss, that my biggest message to someone else would be, you cannot change someone else. Yes, you can be there for them, but if they are not willing to take the steps, you have to let go of your guilt, because it's just going to drown you.
That's really endearing and really, really endearing. And thank you for sharing that because I think it really takes courage and also at the same time vulnerability to, share this. And I think your ability to turn pain into purpose is truly remarkable. So how do you navigate through these unique dynamics in your life? Any specific techniques or therapies that have been useful to you?
I'm sure there is. I think I just I like to say I fly by the seat of my pants sometimes. And I think that has more to do with my autism than anything else. Is I will either plan everything right to the second, and then by the time I need to use the plan, it's past, because I've spent too much time planning. Or I can't even manage to figure out what the next step is because there's too many choices and that's too overwhelming. So I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants. But I will say, in therapy, the one I've already mentioned was really important, but another one was recognizing emotions and responsibility levels. When it comes to that, I think a lot of us just expect adults to know what emotion they're feeling, but that's not always the case. We From my experience, it's been a difficult time saying that I have other emotions besides the basics. I'm mad, I'm happy, I'm sad, whatever. Because I would go into my therapy session and the first thing she'd, "Oh, how are you today?" "Well, I'm fine." Fine is not an emotion. Fine is not a being. "How are you?" I'm like, I don't know then. If I can't use the word fine, I don't know. So we spend a lot of time learning different words to describe how I was in those moments, because fine is not an answer. That was something that really stuck out to me because that was always my go-to. I'm fine. Well, nope, can't use that one. And then the other really important one in therapy was the level of responsibility. So, yes, everybody is responsible for their own actions. But at the time that I was going to therapy, I was talking a lot about talking about brain and talking about a bunch of other stuff too, but because I've shared it on the show already, the guilt of what could I have done differently for Brandon. And so there's like a bunch of worksheets that we went through. And in there was let's pick specific scenarios. So one of the specific scenarios that I picked was the conversation I had the week before his death. And so we wrote it all out. What was the gist of the conversation? It was really me telling him, "No, I don't want to see you." But my guilt came from, instead of saying, "Because you are still addicted to, like, you're still in active addiction, I don't want to see you." Instead, I said, "Well, no, COVID won't let us." And so I had a lot of guilt over that, because what if I would have said the other thing? But I was too scared to say it to him, because based on his previous reactions to me, he would have yelled and screamed and called me names, and I couldn't handle that. So as we're going through this worksheet, she goes, "Okay, but realistically, your responsibility is not to have taken the drugs out of his hand." Well, true. That I couldn't have. I wasn't anywhere near him. I didn't even know where he lived at the time. So we kind of worked through that, and it's like, okay, so you are responsible for, say, 10% of that conversation. I'm just making it up because we talked about this a couple years ago now. But say you're 10% responsible for this, but he is 90% responsible. And that's okay that you have a small bit. That doesn't mean that you have to be guilty or feel bad about it, because when you look at the reasoning whys and break down how scared I was at the time to say something different, and then working through the fear side of things. Why was I scared? Well, that dates back to things that happened 20 years ago, and working through the trauma responses. So there was a lot of layers to it, which is hard to explain. But working backwards and through all of these layers to figure out why a trauma response is the way it is, where did it come from, and realizing that now I am in a safe place. So I am able to say things that I previously was far too scared to say. That is one of the biggest helps that I found.
Lovely. That's really lovely. Lovely, Randy. Also, um, uh, you have written memoirs about your experiences. So, how has writing helped you process your emotions and connect with others?
Writing is always my go-to to express my emotions. Sometimes it's really tricky to find the words. Instead, it's much easier for me to write the words. Even though it'd be the same as if I've said it as if I write it. Again, I think it's a trauma response. Saying it verbally might get me into trouble, but writing it down is secretive. Unless, you go and publish it like I did. um, so writing it out is actually one of the most proven methods for coping. If you get your thoughts down on a paper, they can be out of your brain. You don't have to keep reliving them over and over. You can let go of these things. You can also work through them. So if I am writing out an example, like I was talking about how I was writing out this example conversation I had with my brother, then I can process it in a different way than just thinking about it. I can process it and go, okay, but why? Why did I do this? And break it down and write it out and get all of what is stuck, the icky stuck inside, and put it onto paper. And then I don't have to hold on to it anymore. That is one of the biggest things. And while I was doing that, I thought, if other people also have these same thoughts or same triggers that I do, then maybe because I'm a loudmouth, maybe I should share it out with other people. And so that's why I decided to do it more and write the memoirs and share it out to other people so that, yes, it's good that I got it out, but now I want to take it that step farther and make sure other people have some kind of outlet and can know that they're not by themselves.
Definitely, definitely. Hey, and I think writing definitely is such a powerful tool. We talk about journaling, we talk about noting down important moments, or sometimes when we are not able to speak to our inner voice. I think writing really, really helps healing. So I think your journey as an author is incredibly inspiring. So, Rani, before we wrap up, if our listeners would wish to connect with you and explore more about your journey, and also they wish to, explore about uh, autism, and also how parenting a child with autism can really be an exciting, enduring journey, how they can do that.
Yeah. I am on social media if you wanted to reach out and connect. I'm on Facebook at RB Media, Instagram, TikTok at Randi-Lee Bowslaugh. And if you're not quite ready to connect, you just want some info, all of my books are on Amazon. If you just put in my name, Randi-Lee Bowslaugh, in the search, it'll come out. And the one specifically about autism, it's called A Mother's Truth. So that's a really good way to at least get started learning a little bit more about it.
Great, great, Rani. We'll have all the details mentioned in the show notes. And thank you so much for this enduring conversation. I think, you have reminded us that we are not alone in our struggles and there is always hope. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. And do refer to the show notes to connect with Randy and explore her beautiful work, her beautiful journey, and keep striving for that inner peace and better health in you. And also remember, mind is always over matter. So, this is your host, Sana, signing off from Mind Over Matter.